The night the devil came riding on the wind, my world was already broken. Out here in the New Mexico territory, autumn of 1882, the land was as hollowed out as my heart. The wind was a thief, stealing the warmth from the earth and the hope from a man. My ranch, a lonely collection of wood and will, stood against it all, a stubborn monument to a life that had ended 3 years prior. That's when the fever took my Sarah. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching our daughter Ellie grow up in the shadow of a ghost. The first drops of rain hit the roof like a hangman tapping his boots. A slow, hesitant rhythm that promised violence to come. Soon it was a downpour, turning the world outside my window into a blur of gray misery. Inside, the fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced like devils on the walls. Ellie sat by the hearth, a book on her lap, but her eyes were 1,000 miles away, fixed on the empty chair where her mother used to sit. She was 10 years old with her mother's copper hair and a soul too old for her small frame. "Storm's getting worse," I muttered, more to the ghost in the room than to her. She looked up, her face a perfect porcelain mask of solemnity. "Will the horses be scared, Pa?" "They've seen worse." A crack of thunder rattled the windows and she flinched, her mask cracking just a little. I felt that old, familiar ache in my chest, the one that never really went away. I crossed the room and rested a calloused hand on her head. It was the most tenderness I could manage these days. "Best get to bed," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Morning comes early, storm or no." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the rain-lashed glass. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused. "Pa?" "Yeah, Ellie girl. Do you think Mama can see the rain from heaven?" The question hit me like a fist to the gut. I swallowed, the words catching in my throat like burrs. "Your mama sees you," I finally managed. "That's what matters." It was a coward's answer, but it was all I had. She seemed to accept it and padded up the stairs. "Night, Pa." "Night, Ellie girl." I returned to the window, the storm outside a perfect match for the one inside me. The wind howled, a lonely, mournful sound. I knew I should check on the livestock, make sure the barn was holding fast against the gale. With a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of 3 years of grief, I pulled on my coat and stepped out onto the porch. The wind nearly ripped the door from my hand. Rain stung my face like 1,000 tiny needles. I squinted into the oppressive dark, my gaze fixed on the familiar shape of the barn. And that's when I saw them. 2 figures, one tall, one small, stumbling through the mud, moving toward my house like wraiths summoned by the storm. My hand went to my hip, a reflex born of a life lived on the edge of nowhere. But there was no gun. Strangers meant trouble, always, especially on a night like this, a night when decent folk were bolted in tight, and the things that weren't decent were free to roam. I narrowed my eyes, trying to make sense of the apparition. A woman hunched against the wind, clutching a small child to her chest. They were soaked, their clothes plastered to their thin frames, their progress through the sucking mud a painful, agonizing crawl. Every instinct screamed at me, "Go inside, bolt the door, pretend you saw nothing." Strangers bring questions. Strangers bring danger. My life was complicated enough, but I couldn't move. Something about the way she shielded the child with her own body, taking the full force of the wind and rain, held me fast. A jagged fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene for a terrifying, beautiful instant. In that flash, the woman looked up. Her eyes met mine, dark, exhausted, but with a fire of defiance in them that the storm couldn't quench. The child in her arms stirred, a small, pale face turning toward the light, eyes wide with a fear I knew all too well. An image of Ellie, asleep and safe in her bed, flashed through my mind. Then an image of Sarah, who would have already been halfway across the yard. Her heart open, her hands ready to help. My jaw tightened, cursing myself, cursing the storm, cursing the memory of my wife that still governed my heart. I stepped off the porch and into the rain. The mud sucked at my boots as I crossed the yard. The woman tensed as I approached, pulling the child even closer, a mother bear protecting her cub. Up close, I could see the hardship etched on her face. She was younger than I first thought, maybe in her early 30s, but life had worn her down, carved lines of worry around her eyes and mouth. The child, a little girl no older than 7, peered at me from the shelter of her mother's arms, her gaze wary and old. "Ain't here to cause trouble, mister." The woman's voice was hoarse but steady, a voice that had known its share of shouting into the wind. "Just need a dry place for the night. For her." She nodded toward the child. "We can sleep in the barn. We won't be a bother." I studied her, the way a man studies a rattlesnake before it strikes, calculating the risk, the potential damage. She met my gaze without flinching, that fire of defiance still burning in her eyes. "Please," she added, and the words seemed to cost her a piece of her soul. "We won't touch a thing that ain't offered." The little girl whimpered then, a sound nearly lost in the howl of the wind, and buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Something in my chest, a gear that had been rusted shut for 3 years, groaned and turned. It was a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. Without a word, I jerked my head toward the big barn behind the house. "It's dry inside. Watch for mice." The woman's shoulders sagged, a barely perceptible release of tension. She nodded once, a gesture of weary gratitude, and turned toward the barn. I hadn't even noticed Ellie standing in the doorway until she spoke, her small voice cutting through the storm's roar. "Pa, who are they?" I turned to find her there, barefoot on the threshold, her white nightgown billowing in the wind. Her hair, unbraided for the night, was a wild halo around her face, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. "No one," I said, ushering her back inside, the cold of the storm following us into the warmth of the house. "Just travelers. Go on up to bed." "But the little girl—" "They'll be gone by morning," I said, closing the door with a finality that brooked no argument. Ellie frowned, but she knew better than to push. She climbed the stairs, but not before casting one last, long look toward the window, where the rain ran down the glass like tears. But they weren't gone by morning, and I was a liar. I couldn't sleep. The image of that woman and child, huddled in my barn, haunted me. It wasn't their strangeness that kept me awake, it was their familiarity. I recognized the look in that woman's eyes. It was the look of a cornered animal, the desperate, dangerous determination of someone who had nothing left to lose but the precious life in her arms. With a muttered curse, I got out of bed, pulled on my boots, and went downstairs. I built up the fire in the kitchen stove and heated some water for coffee, making it black and strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe. On impulse, I warmed a can of beans, the smell filling the quiet kitchen. I put it all on a tray, grabbed a thick wool blanket from the chest by the door, and stepped back out into the night. The storm had eased, the rain softening to a gentle patter. The mud was thick and greedy, but I made my way to the barn without spilling a drop. I pushed the heavy door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. A sliver of moonlight cut through a gap in the roof, illuminating the scene within. They were huddled together in a nest of hay, just as I'd pictured. The girl was asleep, but the woman was awake, her eyes gleaming in the darkness, watchful and wary. "Brought you something," I said, my voice low. I set the tray on a bale of hay and took a step back, giving her space. She didn't move at first, just watched me with that same exhausted gaze. Then slowly, carefully so as not to wake the child, she rose and approached the tray. In the dim light, I could see her more clearly. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a face made for defiance. "Thank you," she said quietly. As she reached for the coffee, the sleeve of her worn dress rode up her arm. For a second in the pale moonlight, I saw it. A ring of dark, ugly bruises around her wrist. Yellowed at the edges, but still stark against her skin. My eyes flicked to the marks, then away. It wasn't my business. It wasn't my problem. I had enough ghosts of my own. "Blankets there too," I said gruffly, pointing. "Gets cold before dawn." She nodded and we stood in an awkward silence, the only sounds the soft patter of rain and the gentle breathing of the sleeping child. "Name's Judah Keene," I said finally. "This is my ranch." She paused as if weighing the cost of a name. "Marion," she said at last. "And that's Clara." She didn't offer a last name. I didn't ask for one. Out here, a person had a right to their secrets. We'll be gone by first light, Marion said. It was both a promise and a plea. I glanced at the child, Clara, curled into a tight ball in the hay, her small face finally peaceful in sleep. That rusty gear in my chest groaned again, a painful, unfamiliar turn. No need to rush, I heard myself say. The words felt like they were coming from someone else's mouth. Storms made the roads a mess. Won't be fit for traveling. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly masked by her usual guarded expression. We don't want to impose. You're not. Here I turned to leave, uncomfortable with my own sudden hospitality. It wasn't like me. It was like Sarah. At the door, I paused. I didn't look back. There's work needs doing around here, if you're willing. I didn't wait for an answer. I stepped back out into the night and pulled the heavy door shut, leaving her with the food, the blanket, and an offer that hung in the air like smoke. As I trudged back to the house, I wondered what Sarah would think. She'd probably be smiling that knowing smile of hers, the one that always saw right through me. When I got inside, I found Ellie sitting at the top of the stairs, her chin on her knees. You were supposed to be asleep, I said, no real heat in my voice. You took them food. It wasn't a question. I sighed. Can't let people starve, even strangers. A small smile touched her lips. So they're staying? Just till the roads dry out, I said, ruffling her hair as I passed. At her door, she looked up at me, her eyes serious. The little girl looked cold, Pa. She's got a blanket now. Good, Ellie said, satisfied. Then she added so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Mama would be happy you helped them. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. Bed, Ellie girl. Now. But as I went to my own room, to my own empty bed, I couldn't shake the feeling she was right. For the first time in 3 years, the strangers in my barn felt less like a threat and more like something else entirely. Something I wasn't ready to put a name to. Not yet. Dawn broke clean and cold, washing the world new. I was on the porch with my coffee before the sun had cleared the mountains. My usual ritual. But the morning was anything but usual. Marion was already in the yard. Barefoot in the cold mud, she was studying a loose fence post by the corral, her head cocked with the critical eye of someone who knew what they were looking at. When she saw me, she straightened up, wiping her muddy hands on her skirt. Morning, she called, her voice stronger in the daylight. That gate's coming loose. Won't hold the stock if another storm blows through. I raised an eyebrow. I hadn't even noticed. I'll see to it. I can help, she offered without a hint of hesitation. I know my way around a fence post. Before I could answer, the barn door creaked open and Clara emerged, clinging to her mother's hand. In the light of day, the child was even smaller and more fragile than she'd seemed in the storm. Her hair was the color of dried grass, her eyes too big and too old for her face. She watched me with the unwavering suspicion of a wild thing. The screen door behind me groaned open, and Ellie stepped out, still in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle. She saw the two figures by the barn and froze, a sudden shyness taking hold. That's Ellie, I said, resting a hand on her shoulder. My girl. Marion nodded. She looks like you. It wasn't true. Ellie was Sarah's spitting image, from her copper hair to the freckles splashed across her nose. But I didn't correct her. I just finished my coffee and set the mug down on the porch rail. Breakfast after chores, I said. Then to Marion, fence can wait. Stock comes first. I expected her to retreat to the barn, to keep her distance, but she didn't. She knelt and said something low to Clara, then crossed the yard with a purpose in her stride that surprised me. I can help with the stock, she said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. Grew up on a ranch down in Texas. No horses and cattle both. I looked her over. In the morning light, I could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the way her dress hung on a frame made sharp by hunger. But there was a steel in her spine that couldn't be denied. You don't owe me labor for a night's shelter, I said. Her chin lifted. I don't take charity. The words hung between us, a declaration of pride I understood down to my bones. It was the same code I lived by. Suit yourself, I said, stepping off the porch. But the girl stays with Ellie. I expected an argument, but she just nodded. Clara, she called, come meet Ellie. The child approached like a nervous colt, never taking her eyes off her mother. Marion knelt to her level. "I'm going to help Mr. Keene with the animals," she said softly. "You stay here with Ellie. Be good." Clara's lower lip trembled. "Don't want you to go." Marion's face softened. "I'll be right there," she said, pointing to the corral. "You can see me the whole time." Ellie, sensing the little girl's fear, stepped forward. "I can show you my dolls," she offered, "if you want." Clara looked from Ellie to her mother, torn. "Go on," Marion encouraged. Reluctantly, Clara allowed Ellie to lead her into the house, casting one last worried glance over her shoulder. When the door closed behind them, Marion's shoulders sagged just for a second. "She's not used to strangers," she said, almost an apology. "Neither is Ellie," I replied. "She'll be fine." We walked to the corral in silence. The horses nickered as I opened the gate, coming forward to greet me. I started checking them over, looking for any injuries from the storm. To my surprise, Marion moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice. She didn't ask questions. She didn't get in the way. She just seemed to know what needed doing, filling water troughs, checking hooves, her movements sure and steady. This was a woman who knew the rhythm of ranch life. "You said Texas," I said, breaking the silence. She nodded, not looking up from a bay mare's hoof. "Goliad County. Long way from here." She set the hoof down gently. "Needed a change of scenery." It was a clear deflection, a door shut firmly in my face. I didn't push it. Everyone out here had their reasons for starting over. Most of them weren't worth sharing with a stranger. We worked in a comfortable quiet after that. The work went faster with her there. I had to admit it, if only to myself. She had a way with the animals, a gentle touch that calmed them. She had a way with the work too, a competence that was rare. As we walked back toward the house, I noticed her looking at the old garden plot behind the kitchen. It was overgrown, choked with weeds, a sad monument to Sarah's passion. "Used to be a proper garden," I said, following her gaze. "Been let go, since my wife passed." Marion ran a hand along the weathered fence. "Good soil, though. You can feel it." "Sarah had a way with growing things," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them, heavy with a grief I normally kept locked down tight. Marion glanced at me, and for a second, I saw something in her eyes. Not pity, understanding. "Some people do," she said softly. Before I could say more, the back door flew open and Ellie burst out, Clara trailing hesitantly behind her. "Pa, Miss Marion!" Ellie called, her voice high with excitement. "Clara's never had honeycomb. Can we have some with breakfast, please?" I looked at my daughter's eager face, then at Clara, who was peeking out from behind Ellie, a shy curiosity in her eyes. "Suppose we could," I said. Ellie beamed. "I told her about the bees you keep and how the honey tastes like the desert flowers." Marion smiled at her daughter, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "Did you thank Ellie for showing you her dolls?" Clara nodded, her voice a whisper. "Yes, Mama." I watched them, this woman and her child. There was a story there, in the girl's skittishness and the fading bruises on her mother's wrist, a story written in pain. "Breakfast," I said, turning toward the house. "Then we'll see about that fence." Inside, Ellie had set the table, for 4, using the good plates Sarah had brought out from back east, the ones we never used. I raised an eyebrow, but I let it go. Marion hesitated at the door, as if crossing the threshold into the house itself was a line she wasn't sure she should cross. Clara pressed against her skirts, a small shadow of her mother's uncertainty. "Come on," Ellie urged, taking Clara's hand. "You can sit by me." The meal was quiet at first. Biscuits, salt pork, eggs from our hens, and the honeycomb oozing golden sweetness onto the plates. I watched Clara take her first taste, her eyes widening in surprise and delight. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. Then Ellie started talking. She filled the silence with chatter about the ranch, about her life, about the time she tried to ride a pig and ended up face first in the mud. Clara didn't speak, but she listened, her eyes darting to me now and then, as if checking to see if she was allowed to be here, at my table. Marion ate little, but she made sure Clara took a second helping of everything, a mother's instinct. When the meal was done, I pushed my chair back. Fence won't fix itself. It was as close as I could come to asking them to stay another day. Marion understood. She nodded. The girls can clear up in here. Ellie's face fell. But I wanted to show Clara the treehouse. Treehouse? Marion's voice was sharp with concern. Not a real one, I clarified. Just a spot under the cottonwoods where she plays. Can we, Mama, please? Clara spoke for the first time, her voice small but eager. Marion hesitated, her gaze flicking between me and her daughter. You stay where we can see you from the corral, she said finally, and you listen to Ellie. Clara nodded solemnly. Ellie's face split into a wide grin. Come on, she said, grabbing Clara's hand. I'll show you where the fairies live. The two girls scampered out the back door, leaving a sudden quiet in their wake. She doesn't warm to people easily, Marion said softly, watching them go. Not anymore. I thought of the bruises, the way Clara flinched at loud noises. Expect she's got her reasons. Marion's gaze sharpened, a wall coming up. We've all got our reasons for the way we are, Mr. Keene. It was a boundary, a warning. I respected it. Fence is this way, I said, letting it drop. We worked side by side all morning, the rhythmic sound of the hammer driving nails a kind of conversation. Marion knew her way around tools. She didn't waste movements or words. From the corner of my eye, I could see the girls under the big cottonwoods at the edge of the yard. They were building something with twigs and leaves, a tiny, intricate structure, the fairy house. Clara's initial caution was melting away under the warm sun of Ellie's friendship. Your daughter is good with her, Marion remarked, following my gaze. Ellie's been alone too long, I admitted. A ranch is no place for a child by herself. No place is, Marion said, driving a nail home with a little too much force. I studied her profile, the hard set of her jaw. How long you been on the road? She didn't answer right away. Long enough, she said finally. Too long. Heading somewhere particular? Away, she said. The word was a destination in itself. I understood that. Sometimes away is the only place left to go. By midday, the sun was high and hot. I called a halt. As we walked back to the house, the girls came running to meet us, their faces flushed with excitement. Mama, Mr. Keene, Clara called, her shyness forgotten. Ellie showed me where the fairies dance. Marion's face softened at her daughter's joy. Did she now? Under the big trees. Clara nodded vigorously. And we built them houses, with roofs to keep out the rain. For a moment, she was just a little girl, happy and carefree. I caught Marion watching her, a look of profound love and sorrow on her face, as if seeing a glimpse of a life her daughter had been denied. Let's get you two cleaned up, Marion said, brushing leaves from Clara's hair. You look like a pair of wild creatures. The girls giggled and ran toward the pump. I turned to Marion. They're getting on well. Too well, maybe, she murmured, almost to herself. I knew what she meant. Attachments. They form fast between children. They break hard. If they were just passing through, this friendship was a beautiful, dangerous thing. Stay for supper, I said, the words coming out before I'd thought them through. Least I can do for the help with the fence. Marion looked at me, her expression unreadable. You don't owe us anything. It's not about owing. She seemed to weigh my words, searching for a hidden meaning, a hidden price. Finding none, she gave a slow nod. Supper then, she said, but we'll earn our keep. I never doubted it for a second. The afternoon settled into a strange and comfortable rhythm. Marion went to work on Sarah's old garden, a hoe in her hand and a fierce determination on her face. From the roof of the barn, where I was patching a leak, I could see the whole picture of my ranch, transformed. Marion in the garden, bringing life back to dead soil. Ellie and Clara under the cottonwoods, building a world out of imagination, the cattle grazing peacefully in the pasture. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, a scene I hadn't known in 3 long years. The thought was so unsettling, I nearly dropped my hammer. Later, after a supper that filled the house with the smells of home-cooked food, after the girls had gone upstairs, their whispers and giggles a soft murmur from above, Marion and I sat on the porch. The night was vast and clear, the sky littered with 1,000,000 stars. We really will leave tomorrow, she said, her voice quiet in the darkness. We've imposed enough. I stared out at the dark line of the mountains. The work's not done, I said. North pasture fence is still down. Roof on the lean-to needs seeing to before the first snow. She looked at me sharply. Are you offering us more work, Mr. Keene? Judah, I corrected her. And I'm just stating facts. There's work needs doing, and you know how to do it. Room and board for labor. A fair trade. It was a practical offer, a simple arrangement. But we both knew it was more than that. It was a reason to stay. A reason for Ellie's laughter to keep filling the empty spaces in this house. A reason for Clara's nightmares to fade. She was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching between us, filled with things unsaid. I'm not looking for anything permanent, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. You have to understand that. We can't stay. The way she said can't, it wasn't about choice. It was about something else, something that was chasing her. Understood, I said, though the word felt like a stone in my gut. Just till the work's done. She nodded slowly. Till the work's done. We sat in silence after that, but the silence had changed. It was an agreement, a truce. A shooting star blazed across the sky, a fleeting silver scar on the black canvas of the night. I wondered if she'd made a wish. I knew I had. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt as comfortable as a well-worn coat. Marion worked the ranch with a quiet competence that left me in awe. The garden began to bloom under her care, neat rows of green pushing through the dark soil. The house started to feel like a home again, filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of two girls laughing. Clara was a different child. The haunted, wary look in her eyes was replaced by a cautious joy. She and Ellie were inseparable, their fairy palace under the cottonwoods growing more elaborate with each passing day. It was a fragile piece, a stolen bubble of happiness in a harsh world, and I found myself wanting to protect it with a fierceness that surprised me. One evening, about a week after they arrived, I knew I had to go to town for supplies. You and Clara are welcome to come, I offered Marion as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and red. Might do you good to see something besides this ranch. A shadow passed over her face. I don't think that's wise, she said softly. Best if we stay out of sight. The words sent a chill down my spine. Out of sight from who? The next morning I rode into Dry Hollow alone. The town wasn't much, just a single dusty street lined with false front buildings. But it was the hub of our small scattered world. And like any small world, it ran on gossip. Mr. Patterson, the general store proprietor, was the first. Heard you had some visitors out at your place, Judah, he said, his tone casual as he weighed out a sack of flour. A woman and a child. News travels fast, I said, my voice flat. Jim Weathers rode past your place, said he saw the woman working in your garden. Folks are wondering is all. A woman on her own, moving in with a widower? It raises questions. She's helping with the ranch, I said, my voice tight. Nothing more to it. The postmaster was next, then Pastor Elkins, who caught me on the boardwalk outside the church. Mr. Keene, he said, his voice slick with false piety. I understand you have guests. It is a Christian virtue to offer charity, of course, but it's an unusual arrangement. People are talking. It could damage your reputation and the woman's. My patience, already worn thin, snapped. What happens on my ranch is my business, Pastor, not yours and not the town's. I strode away, leaving him sputtering on the boardwalk, my face hot with an anger I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the gossip that bothered me. It was the judgment, the way they were picking apart Marion's situation, turning her desperation into a tawdry story to pass the time. They were judging her without knowing a single thing about her strength, her pride, her courage, and that felt like a betrayal. As I drove the wagon out of town, the supplies rattling behind me, I felt a powerful, urgent need to get back. Back to the ranch. Back to the fragile peace we had built. Back home. The word echoed in my mind. Home. When had this place started feeling like home again? The sun was setting when I finally crested the last rise. The ranch was spread out below me, bathed in a soft, golden light. Laundry fluttered on the line. Smoke curled from the chimney. Two small figures darted between the cottonwood trees, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. And then Marion emerged from the house, shielding her eyes to look up at me. In that moment, a powerful, terrifying thought struck me. I didn't want her to leave. Not when the work was done. Not ever. The girls ran to meet the wagon, Ellie shouting about candy, Clara hanging back, shy now that I'd been gone for a day. I gave them each a paper-wrapped sweet, and Clara's small face lit up with a hesitant smile. Marion helped me unload the supplies, her movements efficient, her eyes searching my face. "How was town?" she asked. "Small, dusty, and full of opinions," I said, handing her a sack of flour. A shadow crossed her face. "Opinions about us." "Nothing worth repeating," I lied. But later that night, after the girls were asleep, she found me at the kitchen table. I couldn't sleep, my mind churning with the whispers from town and the look in her eyes. She came in silently, her hair loose around her shoulders, a shawl wrapped around her against the night chill. She looked ethereal in the lamplight. "Clara's having nightmares again," she said, her voice low. "First time since we got here." "Because I went to town?" "Maybe." Her fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "She worries about being found." "By her father?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. She met my eyes, and the weariness in her gaze was so profound it made my heart ache. But she didn't shut me out. She nodded. "By Lyle," she said, the name a bitter taste on her tongue. "He's not her father in any way that matters, but legally he has a claim." She told me then, a story that came out in broken pieces, a tale of a charming man who turned cruel after the wedding vows were spoken, a story of years of fear, of fists and angry words, of a mother's terror as she watched her daughter start to shrink, to disappear into herself. "I couldn't let her grow up like that," Marion whispered, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "So we ran. We've been running for 5 years, never staying in one place long enough. And he's still looking for you." A humorless smile touched her lips. "Lyle doesn't like losing what he considers his property." "You think he'll find you here?" "Eventually," she said, her voice filled with a terrible resignation. "He finds us everywhere. That's why we can't stay, Judah. No matter how much—" She trailed off. "No matter how much what?" I prompted, my voice gentle. She looked at me, her eyes naked and vulnerable. "No matter how much we might want to." The confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, beautiful, heartbreaking thing. And in that moment I knew. I knew what I had to do. "This is your home now," I said, the words coming from a place of certainty deep inside me. "Yours and Clara's, for as long as you want it." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't understand what he's like, what he's capable of." "I understand that you've been running for 5 years," I said, leaning forward, my voice intense. "I understand that my daughter is happier than she's been since her mother died, and I understand that this ranch feels alive again with you here." "I can't remember the last time someone offered us a home," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was cool, her fingers strong. "Stay," I said. "We'll figure out the rest. Together." She didn't pull away. She just looked at our joined hands, a look of wonder on her face. At the doorway she paused. "Thank you, Judah," she said softly, "for everything." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet kitchen. But I wasn't alone. Not really. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of a terrifying, wonderful thing. It felt full of hope. The next few days were a kind of dream. We fell into a rhythm, Marion and I working side by side. The unspoken thing between us, a current running just beneath the surface. The girls were inseparable, their world under the cottonwoods a kingdom of their own making. Marion didn't speak of leaving anymore, and I didn't press her for an answer about staying. We just lived day by day in our fragile bubble of peace. One afternoon, I was on the barn roof when I heard the girls talking below. "You have to make the letters big," Ellie was saying, "so Mama can read them all the way in heaven. I write to her every week." "Does she write back?" Clara asked. "Not with letters," Ellie said, with the simple faith of a child. "But I can feel her listening. She tells me she loves me." My heart ached. I'd never discouraged Ellie's letters, her private ritual of grief. "My papa doesn't love me," Clara said, her voice small and matter-of-fact. "He just wants to own me, like one of his horses. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. That's stupid, Ellie declared loyally. You're not a horse. You're a person. And now you have me and Pa too. Pa says you can stay forever if you want. I nearly dropped my hammer. She'd asked me no such thing. But my fierce, perceptive daughter had seen the truth in my heart before I had even fully admitted it to myself. That evening, I told Marion what I'd overheard. She's telling Sarah about you, I said, watching her face in the fading light. About how you're staying forever. A shadow crossed her features. Children need their fantasies. It doesn't have to be a fantasy, I said, turning to face her. I meant what I said the other night, Marion. This is your home. If you want it. I want to believe that's possible, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the horizon. But Lyle. Let me worry about Lyle, I said, the words coming out with a force that surprised me. I know what I'm capable of, and I know that this home, this family, is worth defending. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why risk everything for us? I looked away toward the gathering darkness. Before you came, this was just a place to exist. You and Clara, you brought the life back. I can't go back to just existing, Marion, and neither can Ellie. I met her gaze. It became my fight the moment you stepped onto my land. Something shifted in her eyes, a wall crumbling. And if Lyle comes, she asked, her voice steady. Then we face him, I said simply, together. The word hung between us, a promise, a commitment. Her hand found mine in the darkness, her fingers lacing with mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a vow. Whatever was coming, we would not face it alone. The feeling came on a cold, misty morning. Marion was in the kitchen before dawn, a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. He's coming, she said, her voice flat. Today, I can feel it. I didn't doubt her. I was mucking out the stalls when I heard it. Hoofbeats, a single rider approaching from the direction of town. Steady, purposeful, a cold knot formed in my stomach. I strode to the house. Marion was at the window, her face pale. It's him, she whispered. Somehow he's found us. The man on the horse grew closer, his features resolving out of the mist. Lean, sharp, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He carried himself with an easy arrogance, a predator sure of his prey. Get the girl, I told Marion, my voice low and urgent. Take them to the back room, lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but me. She nodded, her fear a palpable thing, but her eyes were fierce. I woke the girls, trying to make a game of it, but Clara knew. Her small face was a mask of terror. Is it him? She whispered. Is it my papa? I settled them in the back room, Ellie's arm around a trembling Clara. I'll keep her safe, Pa, Ellie promised, and in that moment, she was the image of her mother. I went back to the front room. Lyle was dismounting in the yard. Marion stood by the window, a drawn bowstring of tension. Stay inside, I said, grabbing my gun from the pegs by the door. Let me handle this. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. No, this is my fight, Judah. I won't hide while you face him for me. I'm not asking you to hide, I said, my voice firm. I'm asking you to let me meet him first. Set the terms. Reluctantly, she nodded. Be careful, she whispered. He's unpredictable. I stepped out onto the porch alone, positioning myself at the top of the steps. A clear statement. This is my land. You are not welcome. Keen, he called, his voice a gravelly rasp. He sauntered closer, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. I'm looking for something that belongs to me. My wife. My daughter. Don't know them, I said, my voice even. Storekeeper in town seems to think you do, he sneered. Don't make this difficult. I've got the law on my side. A man has rights. Before I could answer, the door opened behind me. Marion stepped out onto the porch. She had put on her best dress, and she stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. Hello, Lyle, she said, her voice steady, his face transformed, a flash of triumph in his cold eyes. Marion, you've led me on quite a chase. Time to come home. We are home, she said, and the word we was a shield and a sword. We aren't going anywhere with you. His hand drifted closer to his gun. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The lady made her choice, I said, stepping between them. She's staying. His eyes narrowed. So that's how it is. You've taken up with my wife, made yourself a family with my child. Clara isn't yours. Marion's voice was sharp. Not by blood, not by care, not by any measure that matters. The revelation hit Lyle like a slap. His face contorted with rage. You lying whore, he snarled, his hand going for his gun. But I was faster. My gun was out, leveled at his chest, before his had even cleared the holster. That's far enough, I said, my voice deadly calm. Get back on that horse and ride away, and don't come back. He froze, calculating the odds. His eyes were full of murder. This isn't over, Keen, he hissed. For today it is, I said. He backed away slowly, his gaze venomous. He mounted his horse, but before he turned to leave, he looked at Marion. You think you're safe with him? It won't last, and when it falls apart, you'll have nowhere left to run. I'm done running, Marion said, her voice ringing with a conviction that was absolute. This is where we stand. He stared at her for a long moment, then wheeled his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and hatred hanging in the air. When he was gone, Marion swayed, the color draining from her face. I caught her, steadying her. He'll be back, she whispered, with the law, or with men he's paid. Let him come, I said, my voice fierce. We'll be ready. The back door burst open and the girls flew across the yard, throwing themselves at us. We stood there, a strange, battered group, holding each other in the morning sun. The battle was won, but we all knew the war had just begun. I didn't want to go back to town. I didn't want to leave the ranch undefended. But Marion's intuition, the same sixth sense that had warned her of Lyle's arrival, was screaming at her now. He won't come back here first, she insisted, her hands kneading dough with a frantic energy. He'll use the law. He'll twist the story. We have to get there first, Judah. We have to tell our side. She was right. Lyle was a snake, and he would use whatever venom he could find. We had to find the anti-venom. The ride into Dry Hollow was tense. Marion sat beside me on the wagon seat, rigid and silent. In the back, Ellie and Clara huddled together, their usual chatter silenced by the fear they could feel rolling off the adults in waves. Our only hope was Sheriff Tom Wilson. He was a fair man, and more importantly, he'd been my late wife's uncle. He was family, but I hadn't seen much of him since Sarah's funeral. The sight of him brought back too many memories, too much pain. Going to him now felt like admitting a failure I couldn't put a name to. We found him outside his office. He was a tall, broad man with a silver star and eyes that saw everything. His gaze took in the scene. Me, the strange woman, the two little girls, and his expression was unreadable. Judah, he said, his voice a low rumble. Brought company, I see. We need to talk, Tom, I said. Inside. He led us into his sparse office. His wife, a kind woman with a warm smile, took the girls next door to her parlor, promising molasses cookies. Clara went reluctantly, her small hand clutching Marion's dress until the last second. Inside the office, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. Marion told her story. She told it simply, without hysterics, her voice low but clear. She spoke of Lyle's cruelty, of the years of running, of the confrontation at the ranch. She laid her life bare on that dusty desk, a desperate, courageous offering. Wilson listened, his face a granite mask. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. Legal matters between a husband and wife are complicated, he said slowly. The law, it recognizes a husband's rights. Marion's shoulders slumped. The hope in her eyes died. So you won't help us. I didn't say that, Wilson said, leaning forward. I said it's complicated, but the law in Dry Hollow is what I say it is. And your husband's rights end where assault and terror begin. He looked at me. Your word carries weight here, Judah. If you say this woman and her child are under your protection, that carries weight with me. It wasn't a promise of victory, but it was a promise to fight. It was more than Marion had dared to hope for. One more thing, Wilson said as we were leaving. You're Lyle, he's in town. Arrived yesterday with 2 other men. Rough types. Been asking questions at the saloon. My blood ran cold. He was here. He'd been here all along, gathering his forces, planning his attack. As we climbed back into the wagon, I saw him. Lyle, standing in the doorway of the saloon across the street, watching us. He was flanked by two men who looked like they'd been carved from rock and malice. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a promise of violence. Marion saw him too. Her hand gripped my arm, her knuckles white. I didn't look away. I held his gaze as I flicked the reins, guiding the horses out of town. I would not show fear. I would not be intimidated. This was my family. This was my fight. They'll follow, Marion whispered, once we were on the open road. I know, I said. We'll be ready. The ranch became a fortress. We worked with a grim, silent purpose, reinforcing doors, checking every gun, preparing for a siege. The girls stayed close, their play subdued, their eyes wide with a fear that broke my heart. As dust settled, painting the sky in bloody streaks of red and orange, we saw them. 3 riders on the horizon, dark silhouettes against the dying light. They're coming, I said. Get the girl, I told Marion. Back room, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. She looked at me, her eyes full of a terror that mirrored my own. But she didn't hesitate. She turned to go, but I stopped her, pulling her into a fierce, brief embrace. Whatever happens, I murmured against her hair, know that these last weeks... I know, she whispered, pulling back to look at me. Me too. Then she kissed me, a first kiss that tasted of fear and hope and a future that might never be. Then she was gone, herding the girls to safety. I stepped off the porch to meet them in the yard. I would not let the fight come to my home. Evening, Keen, Lyle sneered, reining in his horse. His hired guns dismounted, flanking me, their hands hovering over their pistols. I've come to collect my family. They're not going anywhere, I said, my voice steady. You want to die for another man's leavings? He spat. They're not his leavings, a voice called from the porch. Marion stood there, a shotgun held steady in her hands. They're my family, and this is our home. Rage contorted Lyle's face. The pretense was over. Enough of this, he snarled, drawing his gun. Everything happened at once. I drew. The hired guns drew. Marion raised the shotgun. We were frozen in a deadly tableau, seconds from a bloodbath. Then a small voice from the doorway. Mama? Clara. She'd disobeyed. She stood on the threshold, Ellie right behind her, a small, brave soldier. Lyle's attention snapped to her. Clara, he roared. Come here. The little girl shrank back, shaking her head. That small act of defiance broke him. The last thread of his control snapped. His gun came up, aimed not at me, but at the porch, at Marion, at his own stepdaughter. But before he could fire, another sound split the air. Hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast. Sheriff Wilson and 3 deputies thundered into the yard, guns drawn. Drop your weapons, Lyle. Wilson's voice was a crack of thunder. It's over. Lyle was trapped. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. Surrounded, outnumbered, his plan in ashes. For a moment I thought he might choose to go down fighting, to take one of us with him. Then with a final hate-filled look at Marion, he lowered his gun. This isn't over, he hissed. In my territory it is, Wilson said, his voice cold as steel. I'm escorting you to the county line, and if I ever see your face in Dry Hollow again, it will be from behind bars. They rode him out of there, a defeated man, his power broken. The threat that had haunted Marion for 5 long years was finally, truly gone. I turned and looked at the porch, at Marion, pale but resolute, at Ellie and Clara holding each other, at my family. I walked up the steps and stood before them. Clara looked up at me, her small face serious. Does that mean we can stay forever? She asked. I crouched down to her level. That's up to your mama, I said, my eyes finding Marion's over the child's head. But as far as I'm concerned, this is your home. Marion looked from her daughter to Ellie and then to me. And in her eyes I saw not the haunted look of a woman on the run, but the clear, bright look of a woman who had finally found her way home. A smile, slow and beautiful, spread across her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, the single word a promise, a prayer, a beginning. Yes, we'll stay. We were married under the big cottonwood trees, the golden leaves falling around us like a blessing. The girls, our daughters, were the maids of honor, scattering wildflower petals at our feet. Sheriff Wilson stood as my witness. There was no fancy preacher, no golden ring. I carved her a ring from the wood of the cottonwood tree itself, a symbol of the roots we were putting down, together in this hard, beautiful land. We didn't need fancy words. We had faced death together. We had chosen each other. We had forged a family not from blood, but from courage and love. That night, after our friends had gone, the four of us sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. Ellie and Clara were curled up together on a blanket, their heads bent over a shared secret, their whispers a soft melody in the quiet dark. Marion's hand found mine, her fingers, strong and capable, laced with my own calloused ones. For 3 years, this ranch had been a place of ghosts, a monument to what I had lost. But now sitting here, with this incredible woman beside me, with the sound of our children's laughter on the air, it was something else entirely. It was a home, a place of life, a place of new beginnings. The storm had passed, and in its wake, it had left not destruction, but a gift. It had brought me my family. It had brought me back to life, and for that, I would forever be grateful. If you enjoyed this story and believe that everyone deserves a safe place to call home, don't forget to like this video and be sure to subscribe for more tales from the edge of the world.